Anti-COVID-19 Volunteer Tehran Task Force. Please maintain a social distance of at least 6 feet. Again, please maintain social distancing. Please help stop the spread of this virus, reduce the death toll, and save lives. For your own safety and your family's safety, please maintain social distancing. Thank you for your cooperation. We are all in this together.
It's a little weird watching that kind of footage and knowing that this is our reality now. Go back 3 to 6 months and we would have never thought there'd be drones flying in the street telling people what to do, going to supermarkets and hearing over the PA to maintain a certain distance, to stand on the X's when we're at the checkout. You know, there's a lot of questions that do arise during this entire flip in all of our lives, and I guess some of them consist of things like, are we pushing towards that dystopian-esque future where we're all under complete surveillance, under total control? And if we are, what does that mean? What's going on, guys? This is Hayden coming at you with another episode of the Pernosophy podcast, a show about life science and philosophy. On this episode, we are going to be talking about this semi-dystopian future that looks like that we're all pushing towards, and in a way, we're all willingly going about the rules and regulations that get us there. Because if you think about it, we've got these restrictions instilled upon us. We're being told what to do all the time, and if we go against any of it, we're up for being fined, we're up for being arrested, and it's a strange sort of point in all of our lives because we don't know any of this type of reality. We're not used to these kinds of rules being put upon us. We can't go to our friends' places. We can't have that social life that we used to have. We can't go to work like normal. All these things are changing so quickly and constantly that we're almost not keeping up with it. But whenever a big change does happen, we eventually normalize it. We sort of sit in that little hole and, yeah, I guess that's just how it is. So when we go to the store now and we do hear over the speakers to don't forget to maintain the 1.5 meter rule, and we're hearing it and it's just sort of going over our heads now. We're like, yeah, we know. We're walking down the aisle and we're purposefully avoiding people. We're waiting for people to go past us, and it's becoming normal to us all now. And obviously this won't be forever, but there will be scars for a lot of people following this. Now, when watching that kind of footage that I played at the start of this episode, it's easy to say, well, that might be fake, or that's just bullcrap because it's just supposed to make people get scared a little more. Somebody could have thrown out that drone and just recorded a voice and made everyone get afraid over it. And that's potentially true, but at the same time, you can see that there are people walking past and they're just, yeah, like that makes sense. Yep, cool. There's the drone and it's telling us what to do. And a lot of people that see those types of things would also be saying, good, that's what we need. We need constant reinforcement of these regulations to ensure that we do get out of this crap situation that we're all in. But one thing that's going on during all of this is it's highlighting this obedience that humans have for the fear of death, because we're being told, if you don't do this, then you are potentially killing all these people. You're potentially killing yourself. And it's this fear that's all in us straight away that we're like, yeah, what do we do? We got to get in line, and we got to make sure that we do what the government's telling us to do. We got to make sure that we're listening to the authorities and going about our lives as best as we can. But when you think about the grand scale of this lockdown, because it's an entire globe that's going into lockdown, you've got countries such as India with 1.3 billion people completely shut down, and they're willingly doing it because they know this is what has to be done. And it's interesting because it's this quick control, this quick takeover that people are normalizing or just accepting. This has happened before. This has happened in the past. We've lived through this type of destruction of lives where things change really drastically, and then people slowly start to normalize it again. And then, the generations that come after it then have to deal with what happened, and life is never the same. Now, I've been reading the book, The Gulag Archipelago by Solzhenitsyn, and it's probably the worst time to read a book such as that because it talks about just this type of thing that's going on. It talks about when regimes sort of start to infect civilization, and then eventually they take over and people turn a blind eye to the negatives, and they no longer are allowed to question authorities. They're no longer allowed to question other thoughts. And in a way, freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of action, all these types of things start to collapse. Now, I want to read out a couple of quotes for the rest of this episode that I just sort of highlighted during the reading, and I'm only about halfway through the book at the moment, but there's the underlying theme is constantly being reinforced. The guy, for those that don't know about this story, Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn, he is basically one of the people that brought down the destruction of the Soviet Union. He was somebody that went through hell during around about World War II era, where it was the Soviets were taking over and arresting so many people, putting them in gulags, the concentration camps, and flipping their lives. So it was the author, Solzhenitsyn, he was a captain in the army, but because he had a friend in the Ukraine army, he was arrested. And it wasn't justified. It wasn't a justified action, but it happened to him. And the underlying theme during this book is that everybody always says the bad stuff doesn't happen to people, to our generation. It's not going to happen here in our country, our safe country. The people back then during this Soviet takeover thought the same. They thought there's no chance our motherland would do that to us. There's no chance our government would screw with us that much. Now, I want to read a quick quote from the introduction by Edward Erickson Jr., just to give you a little bit more of an understanding, a little bit more substance to this topic. He writes, "To read the Gulag Archipelago through a moral lens is to understand that government power can perpetrate all sorts of atrocities upon human beings, body and soul, but it can never fully succeed in quenching the human spirit. Yes, some people will submit and will die spiritually, but others will endure and prevail. Despite all of the indignities inflicted upon them, their innate human dignity will remain intact. In this sense, totalitarianism must always fail." And so again, I'm only halfway through the book, but you can see that even in one of the darkest times in human history, there's still some sort of positivity to pull out of it. Even when there's total control, there's still the human spirit. There's still potential to overcome the dark realities. I'm not saying that is relatable to what we're going through today. I'm not saying that the gulags are similar to COVID-19. I'm not saying that human life as a whole and what everybody's now going through is similar, but there are types of themes that are present during this kind of story and to what we are living through now. And one of the big things is questioning: are we normalizing what's going on around us? Are we being silenced when people are speaking up about alternative thoughts? So there's a big discussion right now where we have to start questioning, where are we killing more in the long run by keeping this place locked down for longer? So are there X amount of deaths due to the virus now, or are there more Y deaths on the other side of the virus? So once we all go back to normal, which probably won't happen, there won't be a normal that we are all used to, but what's the death toll, or just even the devastation upon human life on the other side, as opposed to what's going on now? And so this kind of question is being asked, and then it's being knocked down because it becomes you're all about the economy versus the people, and you just want people to go back to work. But it's not like that, because it's talking about human lives that are being impacted right now and what that means for them now and in the future versus the people that are being impacted harshly by this virus. And so there's definitely a topic that needs to start being unraveled now, as we start to, in Australia, overcome this peak that they thought we were going to push into. And on top of all that is the question, what does happen to the economy after that? Because all this money is being given out all around the world, but what happens on the other side, and where's all that money coming from in the first place? Because there's one answer to that, and that is just to raise taxes after. So everything will just be inflated. So all the money that you've earned, all the savings that you've made, all those properties that you've invested in, they all kind of become a little bit more devalued because the money is no longer the same as what it was, 6 months ago. So what you've earned, well, you've played it safe, you've been smart, you've invested, all these kinds of things, that all changes straight away. And one of the answers to that the government has done in the past is just to raise taxes. But then, he talks about this in the Gulag Archipelago, where it happened, where they raised the taxes so much that people couldn't afford their houses anymore. So then they lost their houses, they lost their farms, they no longer could earn money, and they were arrested because they were also hoarding money, because they had built up property worth. They built up a life where they were an individual, they were self-sufficient. I'm going to read a quick quote out that relates to exactly this. So this is from page 25 by Solzhenitsyn. The usual practice was to impose on them ever-increasing and finally totally intolerable taxes. At a certain point, they could no longer pay. They were immediately arrested for bankruptcy, and their property was confiscated. The state needed property and gold. Now, that's a bit of a grim way of thinking about it, but there's definitely something to be said when all the money goes and people are being delegated all this money from the government. And how do you bounce back from that? How do you bring back the economy after that? You can print more money, sure, but that still means that you're devaluing the dollar that you've got these days. So the only other option is to tax people more. So we're all going to be probably hit with more taxes over the years, and maybe we'll never recover from that. And one thing that adds to this dystopian-esque vibe, where we're being told what to do all the time, we've got these controls instilled upon us, is the fact that there are these people that are higher up that are telling us not to question things, that are saying, for example, the WHO Director General, he was saying the other day not to politicize this, not to point fingers at anybody, not to say this is China's fault, this is America, not to say anything, and it's just going to separate us more, which is true in a way, but it's also a strange thing to say, that we're not allowed to question the authority, because we should always be at a point where there is that discussion, where there's that freedom of speech, where we can go back and forth between one another, which is why we've got the different parties, we've got the left and the right, and they're able to battle. If we didn't have that opposition, then things would be strange, right? Because you can't just have that one thought, that one way of life. There's no chance that we can have that totalitarian regime where everything's beautiful for everybody, where nobody's impacted. There's always going to be these hierarchies where we are vying for power, where people are vying for control and trying to instill their own beliefs. And that's the kind of clash that we all live through, and that we will always live through, because that's just how life is built. It's built upon these hierarchies where there has to be systems and people that are in power that maintain systems. And by the WHO Director General saying to not politicize, to not question things, because that'll end up making it worse for everybody. It's, in a way, it's this extra control where it's like, don't you go against me, because then therefore this will happen. And he actually did make threats alongside this, because he was saying, don't politicize it, because if you do, it's going to end up with more body bags, which is a crazy thing to say. He's actually saying, if you don't listen to what we're saying, and this is coming from someone that didn't want to ban travel. He said you don't need to ban travel between countries. It's not going to stop anything. And he also said that it's not past human to human contact. It's not possible to be past that way. And it is fair enough in a way, because they didn't know what this virus is capable of. They didn't know the extent of what it could do and what restrictions needed to be employed, because they were saying at one point that you don't need to worry about masks. And now they're sort of starting to talk about, well, maybe we'll all be wearing masks for 6 months after this. And they're saying, don't worry about the human to human transmission. And now, and then obviously we got the social distancing rules instilled upon us. And the big thing is that we should always be allowed to talk about all of it. We should always be allowed to question everything. And I just want to read another quote out of the Gulag Archipelago. As the folk saying goes, if you speak for the wolf, speak against him as well. And you can see what that means in this context, what we've been talking about this entire episode. We should always be allowed to question things and to speak against our masters or our authorities. There should never be a time when we just lapse into relaxation, where we just allow things to happen all around us. And the last quote I want to read is from the foreword by Jordan B. Peterson in this book. The only systems that have produced some modicum of wealth, along with the inevitable inequality and its attendant suffering, are those that evolved in the West with their roots in the Judeo-Christian tradition, precisely those systems that emphasize above all the essential dignity, divinity, and ultimate responsibility of the individual. And that truly is one big thing that we can take out of all this. No matter what we're all going through right now, we can always maintain our sense of self and ensure that we remain optimal and healthy to not only look after ourselves, but look after all our loved ones and make sure when we do get a chance to start going back to work, when we start going back to this normal way of life, whatever that does mean in the future, that we don't lose our sense of what we have all grown up with, what we've all lived throughout these last X amount of years in between the entire collapses of like World War II to now, where we've all lived through this period of time where it has been okay, when things have been stable, and we want to get back there as best as we can. Anyway, I guess that's about it for this week's episode. I would really love to hear your thoughts on this topic. I'd love to know what your experiences are with these, I guess, this conspiracy sort of dystopian vibe that's going on in our lives at the moment, and the thoughts of, are we normalizing this type of evolution in our lives, this direction that we're all heading towards? You can let me know by jumping on pernosophy.com. You'll be able to click on the individual episode and just leave a comment below. You can also jump on Twitter and Instagram at Hayden Perno, or specific for Instagram at Pernosophy. You can also just write me an email at pernosophy@gmail.com. Anyway, thanks for tuning into this week's episode, and I'll talk to you soon.